Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on the 5th Annual Platinum Group Metals Roundtable, hosted by the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, or MISTRA, in partnership with Creamer Media's Contract Publishing. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm Shannon Durejo from Creamer Media's Contract Publishing, and I will be assisting our esteemed panelists this afternoon. Today's webinar takes place under the theme Building a PGM Industry Social Compact for South Africa and aims to facilitate the central coordination of PGM activities in the country. MISTRA will also launch its consolidated report on its previous annual PGM roundtables. This year's report is titled Partnerships for PGM Beneficiation Through the Hydrogen Economy. All attendees will receive a free digital copy of the report. Please note that the Q&A function has been enabled, so please post your questions into the Q&A box, which you'll find on the panel at the bottom of your screen. You can also interact with the panelists and other attendees in the chat box. If you miss anything during the presentation, don't worry, we are recording the webinar and we'll be sending you a copy of the recording afterwards. We are also streaming the webinar live to the Mining Weekly YouTube channel. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Xolelwa Kashe-Ketia, Director, Project Management at MISTRA, who will facilitate the webinar. Over to you, Xolelwa.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon to our friends and colleagues from the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, all our supporters and sponsors, and so on. As introduced, my name is Xolelwa Kashe-Ketia. I'm the Director Project Management at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. My role today is to facilitate today's program. And as already explained, we are running a program that's in two parts. And the reason behind the program being in two parts is that the first part is a virtual launch of a report that the Mapungubwe Institute has collated on the reflections of the past four roundtables. Today is another roundtable specific to the PGMs as strategic minerals. The rationale behind this for the Mapungubwe Institute was that after we launched our initial report on the strategic role of PGMs in the hydrogen economy, we found that there was a lot of debate and engagement that we needed to have. And we embarked on a process wherein we brought together different stakeholders around the topic of PGMs as being strategic to South Africa. So what we've done then is to collate all those presentations and reflections and reproduce them as a report. Once we finish with the first part, which is that launch, we will then get into the subject of today's discussion, which is to look at the potential for a social compact around PGMs in South Africa. Now, without wasting any more time, I'd like to call upon the speakers who are going to be leading us during this first part. But just before that, a bit of housekeeping. Please ensure that when you join late, you still ensure that your microphone is muted and that your video camera is off so that we can allow for better connectivity. There will be a poll that will be presented. It will show up on your screen. And once that is done, you can give your responses. And our meeting hosts, Shannon, Anelile, and Supokazi, will be managing that process. We will not have any discussions after this first part. We will save that for the second part. So I would like to call upon our Executive Director, Mr. Joel Nechitenze, who will then give us the welcome remarks to the first part of this roundtable. Over to you, Joel. Thank you.
Thank you, Xolelwa, and good afternoon, and thank you very much to all the partners for again joining us at this annual roundtable on Platinum Group Metals. when the Mapungubwe Institute launched the book on South Africa and the global hydrogen economy, that was in 2013, fuel cell technology seemed like a dream beyond the horizon. Propelled by both scientific inquiry and a commitment to ensure optimal utilization of PGMs, MISTRA set out to promote the triple helix approach, that is to ensure purposeful collaboration between government, the private sector, and research institutions in pursuit of the hydrogen economy. Today's event is particularly special because it is the 5th annual MISTRA Roundtable. But even more important than a mere anniversary is the fact that there's been a welcome mushrooming of both formal and informal platforms of engagement since the first MISTRA Roundtable in 2016. This year has been particularly good for the hydrogen economy, in my view, almost unsighted in the context of COVID-19. Many initiatives have been launched, including the government's Hydrogen Society roadmap process, in partnership with all the domestic stakeholders, and along with the SADC Green Hydrogen Initiative. Countries in the European Union and developed Asia have shown profound confidence in the potential of the region to become a major supplier of green hydrogen. And across Southern Africa, there is agreement that we should take advantage of these developments, in part as our contribution towards a low carbon future. And interestingly, recent research points to the fact that PGMs can in fact improve the operations even of electric batteries by increasing their discharge capacity and cyclability. And so we are seeing the widening and deepening of the utilization of PGMs. But for me, 3 recent milestones in South Africa are worthy of celebration. In August, Bambili Energy, which manufactures fuel cell systems using intellectual property from the HAISA program, employed its fuel cells as the energy source at the COVID-19 field hospital in Tshwane. In September, Chem Energy opened its South African fuel cell factory at the Dube Trade Port. We are told it's worth about $200 million US, and it's characterized as the most advanced fuel cell factory of its kind in the world. Again in September, Mitochondria reached agreement with the IDC and DBSA to help fund a feasibility study on stationary fuel cell manufacturing facility and its commercial operation. These 3 examples of practical progress underline the speed with which South Africa is joining the world as a deliberate actor in the nascent technology. Quite clearly, the initiatives that were started a few years ago are starting to feed on one another in a virtuous cycle, creating possibilities for exponential growth of the industry in South Africa, all building on the HAISA initiative of the Department of Science and Innovation, which was launched a few years ago. Globally, from Japan's many initiatives, including plans to showcase fuel cell technology during the Olympics, to South Korea's drive towards 2 hydrogen cities, and the billions that are being invested across the world in fuel cell applications, including in aircraft and shipping, it is quite clear that the hydrogen economy is coming into its own. As part of the commemoration of this 5th roundtable, as has already been indicated, we'll be publishing today a report on the other roundtables held since 2016. The aim is to hold a mirror up to ourselves as partners to assess whether we are actually making progress. Going forward, we need to find positive answers to 4 critical questions. 1, are we sufficiently promoting the practical adoption of fuel cell technology and related market demand in South Africa? 2, are we ensuring that our expertise in manufacturing fuel cells and their components is sufficiently appreciated for that expertise to be integrated into global value chains? 3, are the various PGM initiatives being optimally profiled for them to be fully embraced, not only by policymakers, but also by society at large? And the 4th question is, how do we ensure that the country's strategic plans, including the IRP for energy and the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, explicitly incorporate the hydrogen economy and fuel cell technology? Beyond this, we need to move forward in operationalizing the Pgm Exchange as recommended in the booklet that we launched at last year's roundtable. And needless to say, success in the PGM value chain depends on strategic management of the sector's political economy, including labor relations, implementation of social and labor plans, and commitment to environmental sustainability. So in welcoming all of you, I wish to underline that as the march to the hydrogen economy gathers pace, so do the responsibilities that we have as partners multiply. Variously and jointly, we should play our part in ensuring that South Africa grasps this nettle. Thank you very much, and again, welcome to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel, for those opening remarks and some insights into the events of or findings rather, of the last few roundtables, but also what has been happening in the public domain, even outside and beyond these discussions that MISTRA has been curating. Now we're going to move on to key findings from these 4 roundtables flowing from 2016 right through to 2019, with the last one being on the metals exchange. And we have with us today, leading that discussion or presentation rather, uZamanzima Mazibuko, who is heading the Knowledge Economy and Scientific Advancement, otherwise known as KESA faculty at MISTRA. Now, KESA is really what is concerned with the STEM disciplines at MISTRA. So that faculty has been holding together this conversation around the platinum group metals, fuel cell technology, and so on. So I will then hand over to Nzima to take us through the presentation. I have noted that there are some questions on the webinar chat function. I would advise everyone to actually rather use the Q&A function so that we can capture all your questions, and the simpler and shorter, the better for us to be able to engage and respond adequately. Over to you, Zama. Thank you.
Thank you, Xolelwa. Good afternoon to everyone. So as our executive director has mentioned, in 2013, MISTRA published a book titled South Africa and the Global Hydrogen Economy, the Strategic Role of Platinum Group Metals, in which it identified that although there were developments in the platinum group metals industry, there was limited collaboration and strained communication between stakeholders. In order to address this issue, MISTRA convened multiple actors to take stock of development in the sector and to anticipate and assess emerging themes with the purpose of promoting PGM beneficiation in South Africa. It was therefore also a response to the contradiction of the country owning the majority of global PGM resources, but lagging in terms of global beneficiation initiatives, particularly in relation to fuel cell technology. There was also a sense that South Africa was at the cusp of a breakthrough in terms of PGMs and that a forum for ideas sharing would be advantageous. This roundtable series, which provides a neutral platform for stakeholders to report back and seek collaboration, has become an annual event since 2016, as mentioned before. The actors that have been active in the roundtables include government through the Department of Science and Innovation, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, the Department of Public Enterprises, and the Department of Energy. Then we've had platinum producers from Anglo-American Platinum, Impala Platinum, and Sibanye Stillwater, and organizations such as the Mitochondria Energy Company, Eco Partners, and others. The deliberations equipped all stakeholders to lobby for policy changes and programs specific to growing the PGM sector. Through the PGM Roundtable series, MISTRA has provided and continues to provide this platform on which competing producers and government can articulate their concerns and identify opportunities for the PGM industry. The series has yielded strategic outcomes, central to which is the intensification of discourse on the political economy of the South African PGM sector and on the hydrogen economy. It has had the additional benefit of enabling a discussion and consensus on the significance of the PGM industry as a national interest. MISTRA also then saw the need to put on record the discussions that have been held over the past few years, which has resulted in a report. This report aims to provide a meta-analysis and overview of the focused discussions and leading themes and resolutions of the PGM annual roundtables from 2016 to 2019. It explores the discussions and agreements from each of the roundtables, as well as the activities that led to those resolutions. It provides an analysis of the participating organizations, as well as the evolution of the programs and roles in the PGM value chain. It explores the formation of strategic partnerships and results obtained from those partnerships. So now I'll take you through some of the key outcomes and resolutions from the roundtables and that you can find in the report. The primary question for the first roundtable was a broad one. We asked, how could South Africa beneficiate the country's large endowments of PGMs? Stakeholders were invited to share details of their respective activities within the PGM industry, the strides that had been made and milestones achieved, and importantly, the challenges faced. This roundtable included a focus on the question, what would it take to forge successful partnerships in PGM fuel cells locally, regionally, and internationally? From the 2016 roundtable, these were some of the key outcomes and resolutions. It was resolved that MISTRA should continue to pioneer the stakeholder engagements for the PGM industry. Motivations included that gatherings of this nature were instrumental for building trust between stakeholders. Accountability was fostered with regards to programs, initiatives, and strategies across stakeholders, and programs could be implemented and future initiatives deliberated, focusing on a common goal. There was a strong notion that South Africa's PGM industry needed to invest in the building of a credible knowledge economy that could penetrate the global PGM industry. The knowledge economy should be increased in terms of technology advancements, but also in market development initiatives. The triple helix approach, made up of a research strand, a government strand, and business strand, was adopted as one that could be most impactful in the sector towards PGM beneficiation. The conversation, however, did not have a perspective from Black industrialists, and this was seen as a weak point. It was resolved that small, medium, and micro enterprises must be nurtured by government. While there was various government initiatives for SMEs, there was no alignment between the two parties. Therefore, a relationship must be created and principles aligned in order for small businesses to enter the PGM industry. It was also resolved that market development must go hand in hand with small business innovation and new technologies. More research should go into answering the questions: how will these technologies be absorbed by world industries? And how do the technologies interface with government initiatives at national, provincial, and local levels? This would serve to ensure that new markets were being utilized efficiently. Africa is a big market to explore, so research should also consider African needs and how minerals and technologies could be utilized to fulfill these needs. Then finally, in 2016, it was resolved that the strategic plan for the platinum industry should be driven by South Africa's interests. Fuel cell technologies, for instance, must be able to bring change to the lives of communities in mining towns such as Rustenburg and Marikana. They should benefit the most from the minerals. They must be upskilled and educated. Rural electrification projects and other applications in the transport sector must be further developed. Then it was the 2017 Roundtable, which was to monitor the progress of stakeholders a year after the first Roundtable and to determine the implementation status of the resolutions taken. With the ongoing high-level engagement by stakeholders, it was also to continue planning for the future of the PGM industry, given known opportunities and problems. From the resolutions discussed at the 2016 Roundtable, the key question put forward to structure the discussions for the 2017 installment were: will the political economy allow for industrialization? What is next in the PGM industry? Where are the institutional gaps in the PGM value chain, and can they be filled? What devices are needed to take South Africa towards higher levels of PGM beneficiation? The key outcomes and resolutions in 2017 are as follows. There was a substantial focus on the triple helix approach, taking forward the resolution from the 2016 meeting. The helix, though, was not working successfully, a consequence of the sector's political economy. The private sector or business strand proclaimed its dire financial state. The government strand needed investment in both research and demand development and had worked closely with institutions of higher learning and explored the commercialization and industrialization aspects. This contestation between the stakeholders was based on the inequitable distribution of benefits from the mining industry. The wall between the stakeholders was a result of the atmosphere surrounding the PGM industry being highly charged. It was perceived as an industry of a few, a common feature of an enclave. This had caused a discourse that embodied a lack of trust between the stakeholders because of the position and varied views each strand held in the PGM political economy. In turn, the union perspective highlighted that the people weren't a priority for many of the strands, as they were impacted through heavy workloads and other unfavorable working conditions. That said, there were progressive discussions where there was some consensus between the stakeholders relating to making working conditions safer and more reliable, or delivering healthcare services promptly, or electrification of houses. The progress of the HISA program was noted as encouraging as a platform for South Africa to build its own demand. It was discussed that HISA should not be positioned as an exclusive government entity. It should move towards other kinds of industrial policy, which include partnerships, technology transfers, and technology licenses. It was also pointed out that HISA would not reach its goal of 25% global fuel cell demand, while the investment in R&D was low. Furthermore, although there were areas where HISA would not be able to compete internationally, there may be avenues for a complementary technology partnership. With regard to market demand, a closer look at captive markets was encouraged. Captive markets for hydrogen fuel cells should be identified as a means to create demand. More research must be done in order to fill and dominate niche spaces, the post office, for example. Public transportation had the potential to be such an industry. The fuel cell bus program was financially constrained previously, but investments were now being actively looked for. It was noted that stakeholder activities occurred largely in silos, and gatherings such as the MISTRA Roundtable were pivotal for cohesion in the PGM industry. There was a call for a higher level of engagement for policymakers alongside technical experts and the Minerals Council, and a focus on a PGM strategy. Looking at global paradigms and the success of industry in countries like China, Korea, and Brazil, the need for catch-up emerged. Some ways for local fuel cell technology to attain maturity, like the catalyst industry, were by inviting global partnerships, ensuring technology transfers, and building national capabilities. Partnering with global original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, would be a significant step. After 20 to 25 years, South Africa would have gained enough knowledge for it to act autonomously. Partnerships should nevertheless be approached with caution, as South Africa's capacity and interests should not be compromised with international organizations set up business locally, and South Africa becomes a consumer. Conditionalities therefore have to be in place. The creation of Black industrialists in the PGM sector was important for South Africa. It was recommended that this discussion be taken up at the 2018 Roundtable. The third PGM Roundtable, the 2018 segment, whose goal was to convey new information on the recommendations from the 2017 installment and discuss them and derive concrete proposals for the way forward. It was also to track progress of the sector from the previous two roundtables, to note trends, and to move ahead on an upward trajectory. From the resolutions discussed at the 2017 roundtable, the key questions put forward to structure the 2018 installment were: what needs to be done, by whom, by when, and how? The 2018 Roundtable recommended further research and operationalization of fuel cells in electric vehicles. Some international advancements included the first hydrogen train entering commercial service in Germany. Fuel cell buses had been successful in other countries. South Africa's first electric fuel cell bus was scheduled for a trial in October 2018 by HISA, South African bus designer and manufacturer Busmark, and the CSIR. The major limitation of fuel cell vehicles was the refueling technology. The HISA System Center of Competence had begun a cost-benefit strategy to lower the costs of the technology. It was recommended that the first trials for electric vehicles be large vehicles that travel long distances, example, trucks, buses, and trains. This was because there was no constraints around charging time if hydrogen as fuel was available. The need for monetary resources was a great concern for the roundtable participants. The high costs of the technologies did prove to be a challenge for the rural electrification mission. The DTI had pre-approval for a 50 million rand critical infrastructure program grant. However, there was still concern about the funding of the project. The participants agreed that fuel cell technologies should form part of the integrated resource plan. It was emphasized that fuel cells would not compete with renewable energy, but rather work collaboratively. The adoption of fuel cells as an energy source was not a threat to other renewable resources. All of the technologies would work together and deliver energy to off-grid locations. It was recommended that the industrialization discussion be unpacked further. There were many possibilities for the Platinum Valley Special Economic Zone, but the program should be designed in a niche way to attract the relevant foreign investment and OEMs. 2019, the focus of the PGM Roundtable was reimagining PGM value chains for effective beneficiation. The aim was to answer the question, how far have we come towards PGM beneficiation? It was also to evaluate, of course, the resolutions of the previous roundtables and to assess the progress made by stakeholders. The key outcomes and resolutions in 2019 were as follows. MISTRA was encouraged to continue facilitating these stakeholder meetings as there was value in gathering of stakeholders in one room and thrashing out certain issues. It was mentioned that the PGM sector would not have been so impactful without these discussions. A strong theme in 2019 was that the PGM sector must move to a more practical trajectory. The world was entering a hydrogen economy epoch, and South Africa was encouraged to take center stage. The research that had been developed in South Africa on the hydrogen economy had potential for more powerful and global applications. Noting these global dynamics and noting that some of the world's largest countries and organizations had invested in, progressed towards, and committed to fuel cells and the hydrogen economy, South Africa had a chance to either be followers or leaders. 5 government departments had agreed as one strand of the helix, but more input was encouraged to be made from the other strands in the development of a clear, articulate, and progressive hydrogen roadmap for South Africa. The formulation of strategic public-private partnerships and alliances was critical in this phase. HySA was applauded for its developments. As it entered its 3rd phase, there were new prospects and new challenges. The transition to a commercial phase was commendable. The hydrogen fuel cell powered scooter had been deployed to post offices in Cape Town. This was a significant milestone for HySA and the DSI, as it was aligned specifically with the green transportation strategy. This captive market may result in a larger demand for fuel cell technology in the country. The results from this deployment would assist in the fuel cell bus development as part of climate change response strategies. It was mentioned that this particular development was initiated after it was spoken of at the 2017 Roundtable. There was encouragement for the PGM industry to seek alliance with the climate change policies of the country. It was stressed that the PGM debates should be anchored in the need for a response to climate change, as well as the potential for financial beneficiation. The National Development Plan explicitly argued for a just transition to a low carbon economy, and the Carbon Tax Act, the Green Transportation Strategy, and the IRP each had prospects for the PGM industry. Thus, the industry should ensure that it was positioned correctly to ensure there was an alignment. The case for broadening of the PGM value chain by the inclusion of Black industrialists was vital. One of the activities to increase the PGM value chain was through focusing on Black industrialists. The insufficient number of these industrialists was observed at the first roundtable, and that a triple helix could not be formed if Black industrialists were not part of the PGM value chain. The future of the hydrogen economy relied on innovation from SMMEs. Anglo American was working on forming a global triple helix of the PGM sector. This was to be further explored. The current partnerships had been helpful and had provided amazing results. For the new global trajectory, new strategies and new partnerships were needed. More monetary investments were required for a successful and large-scale fuel cell deployment across the country, now that pilots had been run successfully. Government departments had committed the investments. However, more funding was still required, and the private sector could play that role. The 2019 Roundtable as mentioned previously, also included the launch of the research report at South African PGM Exchange, which was a collaboration between MISTRA, the JSE, and PES, looking at whether a PGM exchange is feasible in South Africa. The report looked at which elements would be needed for the exchange to be successful. It looked at the legitimacy of the exchange, which would assure would-be participants that the exchange would deliver on its promises of transparency, reliability, and efficiency. Secondly, a supportive regulatory framework, which should be two-pronged. The first prong would be to ensure that the exchange was sound, which pertained to issues of prudential, market integrity, and business conduct regulation, as well as market stability protection. The other dimension was to cultivate the exchange growth through innovation and enabling the development of new markets. South Africa does have the legal and regulatory architecture to support a thriving PGM exchange. Thirdly, a strong banking sector. Exchanges require a capable banking sector, and South Africa was in the top 3 of well-regulated banking systems in the world. Fourth, reliable delivery. The logistical capacity to deliver the agreed-on physical quantum of PGMs was paramount for an exchange. South Africa had the logistical capacity to do so and a proven track record in the minerals sector. Lastly, an enabling legislative and political environment. The next phase of the project would be to continue liaising with would-be implementers and participants of the exchange to assess the business case of the exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zamanzima, for that very detailed presentation and overview of all the discussions and developments over the past 4 years. Now, what we're going to have is a short poll with about 2 questions or so. I've noted that there are some hands, there's some participants who've raised their hands, and just to remind you, we're not going to have a discussion during this first segment of the event. We've also taken note of all the questions that are in the Q&A section, and our executive director has been managing those, but a lot of the answers will be coming out of the panel discussion, and I see a lot of them relate to technology, environmental issues, and so on. Lastly, the report that Zama has just presented has been shared with everyone on the chat function. So if you go to the chat function, you will find a link there where you can download this report, which is really a compilation of all the 4 roundtables. So before moving on to this year's roundtable, the 5th annual roundtable, I will allow our hosts or the technical team to start activating the poll. And as you can see, there's some questions there. You can respond to them, and we will give you some time to engage with the questions. This is important for us as well as we continue with our research to get a sense of what those who are key actors in the sector, what are their impressions, and also what they think about the fuel cell market, whether it's something that's viable or that is possible, and also just to get indications or direction or pointers towards what the most urgent action is to actually realize or benefit as a country from these strategic minerals. So I'll give you some time, and we will then close the poll when we've seen that sufficient participants have responded. Thank you. I think the technical team has received sufficient results, and I'm just going to allow you to start responding if you have not done so for the last minute before we disable this poll. Okay, I've been told that the poll has been disabled. So without wasting any more time, and we are now going to move on to the second part of today's event, which is actually the crux of what we are working on. So I think what you've seen now are the result. What you have on your screen right now are the results of the poll in terms of the questions that have been posed to the attendees. Okay, so let's move on then to start part two, which is about social compacting. And I'm hoping that we will gain some more time as we've lost some few minutes there during the first session. But then when we talk about social compacting around platinum group metals, I suppose we'll be addressing some of the questions that many of you have had. I know that when I had conversations with some of the panelists, some of the questions that were posed to me was, why is it that we're so good at having these dialogues? I mean, MISTRA has already shared reflections on the past 4 years, and there was this despondency about having yet another talk shop. And this is something that South Africa tends to do without any demonstration of action or implementation. We've identified the challenges through the engagements that we've had. We've identified possible solutions. There's potential for fuel cell technology and hydrogen economy for our country, but there's also potential for financial beneficiation. But how does this happen without a common vision or some kind of agreement as the key stakeholders? And as we know that it's the nature of our country to differ on the most fundamental issues, even where there's potential for opportunity. So when we talk about social compacting, what are we talking about? We're talking about an agreement or a pact, really, that involves various parties, but it is informed by a common goal. And it has to be informed by a particular issue or challenge. And in this case, or in terms of today's discussion, it's the platinum group metals. But also part of what informs a social compact is the idea of consent. Now, that means that we have to establish some common ground. We have to also build on trust, but also there has to be a demonstration of goodwill and commitment to partnerships. However, we need to be mindful of our historical context when we go into compacting. We also have to be mindful of the socio-political dynamics and also the economic structure. We keep talking about the structure of our economy that needs reconsideration. In our studies on social compacting, we've looked at various countries such as Singapore, South Korea, Ireland, Sweden, Rwanda, Mauritius to learn from compacts that have been forged elsewhere. And through this, we've learned that compacts are really elite consensus-making platforms. They involve institutions and also concern state building. They're about the redistribution of wealth, but they also have to be informed by inclusive political systems. They need to address inequality. They need to also encourage ongoing social dialogue. But most importantly, social compacts require ethical and visionary leadership. So, why do countries go into compacts? It's to develop human capital, to create jobs, to reduce inequality, to sustain partnerships, to also ensure that there's pragmatism above dogma, because we tend to hold on to our ideological positions without consideration for the bigger good for the nation. But what compacts would do would then augment state capacity and also ensure good governance. So with that said, to open up this discussion, today's discussion on compacts, we're going to welcome Martin Creamer, who's representing our partner for this event today. We all know Martin Creamer is quite informed about platinum group metals. Creamer Media itself is always on a path to also engage on PGMs. Some of us listen to him on a regular basis on radio shows and on SAFM, where he leads the commentary on platinum group metals. So before we get into our panel discussion, let me welcome Mr. Martin Creamer from Creamer Media, who will then give us some opening remarks to launch this discussion, but also at the same time to offer some reflections from media. Welcome, Martin, and thank you for hosting us and joining us today.
It's a great pleasure, and I want to thank MISTRA because they've done such a lot of work on this, and we really deserve in South Africa to start moving forward, because I've been on this path for many, many years. I think I can go back to the 80s when I used to discuss this with the platinum group metals producers. They were always keen on marketing at that stage. They were then deeply into catalytic converters. But even in the 80s, they used to say our next step is into hydrogen fuel cells. And they used to talk PEM fuel cells, particularly, that we should be targeting. And as a journalist, I really get a chance to speak. So it is great that I'm able to speak here, but I'm also able to speak with my head and my heart, because with my heart, I feel that we haven't gone fast enough on this as a country. And that's why I'm so happy that I can see the detail to which MISTRA is tackling this. I think there's no one else in South Africa which is tackling it with such strategic detail. So I really want MISTRA to be more prominent and to be featuring more often in the media because of this great work that they're doing. We will obviously want to give more coverage to the movement that should be gaining far more momentum in South Africa than it is. You know, we've been around this issue for so many years, as I say, going back to the 80s. But there was also a time at COP17 in Durban when a detailed study was put forward, and one hoped that the politicians would grasp it. There were politicians there who said this fitted in beautifully with South Africa's beneficiation program, and they would go ahead with it. But of course, politicians change. Other people take their places and they've got different directions. And this is where we need to sit down in South Africa and keep that momentum that some build up so that we can move forward. Because I do think now is the hour. I have never experienced such activities around the hydrogen future of the world. And it's not only us that are continuing to talk on it at a pace, but others are starting to move at a faster pace. And we see Germany actually having a strategy for the hydrogen economy. I know that Germans will be here next week because they're so keen on securing green hydrogen from South Africa. And then again, I get back to that PEM technology, where it requires the great platinum group metals that we've had in our ground to actually generate that green hydrogen. And I also look at Southern Africa, and I see Sasol and other activities there where they are trying to bring the whole of Southern Africa into a situation where we can become an energy exporter rather than an energy importer. And that is so crucial for the region, because we pay a lot of money to have energy imports at the moment. It would be wonderful to switch that around and have energy exports. And we've got the sun and we've got the wind, and we're finding out that we've got superior sun, but also all of a sudden superior wind around the coast. We can do so much. And I must say that Namibia is moving on this, and the Windhoek base is coming up a lot, and their liaison with other countries is quite significant. And I always say to them, you know, you people could move very fast because you've got the sun and you've got the wind and you've got Walvis Bay closer than we are to Rotterdam, Rotterdam already preparing to receive green hydrogen, Europe wanting to get its hands on green hydrogen, which is why the Germans have already funded a study here to find out where the sweet spots are in Southern Africa that could generate green hydrogen. So you've got the generation of hydrogen through electrolyzers using platinum group metals, if they use the PEM technology, which is superior. You've also got fuel cell technology using the platinum group metals, and hopefully through that PEM technology. And we see suddenly demand starting to show on the horizon, and people putting their commitments into print themselves with huge adverts. And the one huge advert that really struck me was the one put in by Hyundai, where they said they are committed to producing 700,000 fuel cell stacks a year. Now, if you look at that, what translates into platinum ounces, that is equal virtually to what Rustenburg Platinum produces a year, just for one company, Hyundai. What about all the others? We know that Toyota is active. We know we see activity with AP Ventures, which is associated closely with South Africa. It's a venture capital company. We see that this particular venture capital company already has as one of its cornerstone investors the PIC, the Public Investment Corporation of South Africa. Now, that is a great coup to have. They're also now setting up in South Africa. They're going to employ local people, and they are driving demand for platinum group metals. So it would be wonderful then if people could gather around, particularly this great strategy that is being put in place by MISTRA, done so much, and then bring in other parties to buy into this so that South Africa can take a move forward. Because not only do I see Namibia starting to move pretty fast, Windhoek and places like that to put out messages all the time, but I also note suddenly Australia has popped up and they are having event after event. They're planning, they're funding, you know, the green economy. They want to export this green hydrogen, and people are saying we want green hydrogen. So, you know, the old days of having the brown hydrogen are starting to move out. And then you have the big problem, and they're saying, but we haven't got the infrastructure where vehicles can pull up and get hydrogen. Well, regulatory, you know, if the state just said each petrol station has to have one hydrogen pump, now we have a precedent for that. We know that Sasol came up in modular fashion, slowly. They were producing fuel here in South Africa, and they would have one pump at each garage so that you could start moving. Because we know that if we move towards a hydrogen economy, use existing infrastructure slightly modified, which is such a big plus. So we could actually pull up at a garage, have a fuel cell car vehicle early, and they are being made at the moment. And we know that this is happening in California. We know that parts of the world are committed to this, South Korea. So takes 2 years. Come on, guys, you know, let's get moving. So I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity. It's a great opportunity for a journalist to be able to speak for some time, because normally the only way we can speak is to ask the questions. And sometimes not even the questions are fully answered. So we feel now, going forward, that South Africa should make a stronger mark in all this. And we believe that MISTRA has done some incredible work, and we need to we need to lock onto that so that we can move forward as a country for the benefit of the South African people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that very powerful and passionate opening statement there, reflections from media, which should be encouraging for the social partners that we have here today with us, representing business, representing government, and also labor. So we're creative in whom we invited for this discussion. And I'm very happy with Martin's scene-setting remarks, wherein actually media can be regarded as a strategic partner for this. Martin offered that, media is suitably placed for PR, so to speak, to communicate all these activities and efforts towards realization of a hydrogen economy, but also to put South Africa in a very strategic and strong position globally, in particular when it comes to issues of climate change. So, to start the panel discussion, we have Dr. Cosmas Chiteme, who is working for HISA. HISA has been mentioned quite a few times. That's Hydrogen South Africa, which is an initiative, a research initiative that's three-pronged, located at various campuses across the country, but it is an initiative of the Department of Science and Innovation. So he'll be speaking as a government representative. And moving on from there, we have Annelisa Matutu, who will be speaking with the voice of business. Annelisa Matutu works for the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and she works within the commodities space there. And if we were to talk about metals or platinum group metals exchange, that is the likely space to host that. And then lastly, we have Dr. Martin Kwaka, who is from the Sam Tambani Research Institute. And this is an initiative or an institute that is established by the National Union of Mine Workers. And he will be speaking with insights from labor around this challenge of this platinum group metals that are strategic, but we're not speaking with one voice. There's multiple initiatives, and where there are initiatives, society is not as informed. So I will give each of the speakers 10 minutes so that they can take us through their impressions about social compacting and also the potential for that, speaking from the position of the arm of the compact that we've illustrated, starting with government. Over to you, Cosmas.
Thank you, Kolelo, and thanks again to MISTRA for the invitation. I'll share my screen. Can you all see my screen in presentation mode?
Yes, we can see it. If you can please enlarge it to presentation mode so that we can all see wonderful diagrams clearly.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to literally rest through the slides, just highlighting points as I go through. I've just framed my short intervention in terms of building a PGM Industry Social Compact through the Hydrogen Society Roadmap development process. And that is work that we have we started early this year when we were looking at the developments that have been done through the Hydrogen South Africa program, but looking now at a broader, to say, how do we move from an RDI initiative into broader recognition by society of the potential benefits of hydrogen and fuel cells. And as you can see from this slide, there is no shortage of policy. I think it's now a question of just saying, how do we leverage existing policy and find the linkages between them, while also identifying the gaps that need to be filled in order for us to move forward in a coherent way. And again, there is support at the highest level of the highest office in the land around issues of the hydrogen economy. This slide is very familiar. I think the message here is we need to move away from the business as usual scenario, move to value-added products such as catalysts, platinum-based catalysts, MEAs, and eventually into stacks. And with that, we would see increased revenue streams that will then be good for our economy. This slide here is just the tortuous journey that is normally associated with innovation. Again, the message is that innovation does take time. It requires resources, it requires commitment, it requires political leadership. And I think we have seen the benefit of that through our recent deployments, where we are starting to see that innovation being incorporated in some of the products that have been deployed recently. Now, again, I think the idea now is to say, how do we bring society and other partners into the broader discussion around hydrogen fuel cells? And that we are trying to do through the hydrogen roadmap development process, where this multi-stakeholder approach has really gone beyond just government, but we are reaching out to business, we are reaching out to civil society, we are reaching out to industry and academia in a typical, almost quadruple helix kind of fashion to create a vision around hydrogen in South Africa. And the idea is to align stakeholders around a common vision that really starts to derive or enable the unlocking of the socioeconomic benefits that would accrue from the implementation. So a number of stakeholders have been consulted. Some of them are in this panel discussion today, looking at, do we move forward as South Africa Inc. To create a broader vision that also links to our renewable energy master plan and response to the increased renewable energy in the energy mix has been articulated within the 2019 IRP document. Now, the process, like I said, has begun. There are a number of growth areas that have been identified, from energy all the way to exports, research and development, and some key enablers that have also been identified to say, these are the things that we need to do. And may I take this opportunity to highlight the issue of education, skills and capacity. I think Martin has raised some issues around infrastructure, but also going forward, what are those opportunities that have been identified in various sectors? We're all aware of the green transport strategy and what it is saying about the emissions reduction in our transport sector. And the good thing about the use of hydrogen as a fuel not only enables us to reduce our, but also creates new industries around the generation of green hydrogen. And it would definitely has the potential to lead to energy independence and move us away from our large fuel imports that we are currently seeing. We are also seeing the replacement of diesel locomotives, particularly in the unelectrified tracks, which already makes sense because the trying to put in electrified infrastructure in those areas is just not economically viable, rather than when you compare to going to fuel cell powered trains. Various industrial opportunities exist in the refinery sector, in the agricultural sector through green ammonia, and even in terms of utilizing our CO2 coming from our coal-fired power stations and combining that with green hydrogen to make other value-added chemicals. I've just tried to highlight some statements here, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to have time to go through each one of them. But again, this is just highlighting where the opportunities exist. I believe that the slides will be shared for people to go through. But again, we have got some frameworks that are also coming through the Department of Public Works, where fuel cells are being incorporated in buildings. And these are some of the deployments that have been done. I think the ED also referred to the recent deployment at one military hospital. Again, this is opportunities for remote offices powered through a combination of hydrogen fuel cells and solar PV. Opportunities to export hydrogen, green hydrogen that is. There's certainly appetite from Europe, Asia, with countries like Japan and South Korea, that we as a country can actually respond to that. And this will be a good utilization of our renewable energy resources. Again, as shown in the pictures there. Opportunities for mining. We have got a very vibrant mining industry that contributes a lot to the GDP of the country. Again, those mining companies have got the opportunity to use their own commodities to actually address some of their current challenges in terms of the high bills or the high cost of ventilation underground. I think the main question that remains now is, how do we cost effectively bring hydrogen fuel cells for use in an underground environment? But already we are seeing open pit mining as an entry point based on the projects that are already underway. At one of our centers, we have actually a tunnel that can actually be used to study how hydrogen would actually propagate in an underground environment. And those are initiatives to try and make sure that those deployments can be done. There is also definitely further opportunities for further research, development, and innovation in order to bring the costs of the technologies down. There is also need to, again, look at appropriate standards and certification requirements that will then enable us as a country to export green hydrogen to those countries that require that. One of the things that we have just started is now to look at skills, not just in the form of masters and PhD, skills that we've been producing as part of the Hydrogen South Africa program, but looking at a practical level to say, we have got a number of, quite a lot of TVET graduates in chemical engineering and electrical engineering who are currently unemployed. And we are looking to now start training them into practical things like the installation, operation, and maintenance of fuel cell systems. And in this regard, just on Monday, we launched the training of 20 of those unemployed TVET graduates that will undergo a 6-week training course And that is a collaboration between the DSI, Sanhedi, the EW, SITA, and Bambili Energy. So we really expect that these are practical steps that we are actually taking in order to operationalize the implementation of the Hydrogen Society roadmap, even while it's still under development. So with those, I would like to thank you once again and look forward to engaging further in discussions with the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Cosmas. I know we rushed you there, but there are some lessons, and especially of great interest is the issue of skills training in partnership with SITAs, but wondering the extent of partnership with other social partners. So next on the agenda is then someone who will be speaking with the business hat on, in particular big business when it comes to this conversation. And so I would like to call upon Ms. Annelisa Matutu, who is from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Annelisa, welcome and thank you for joining us. You have 10 minutes as well to take us through what business is doing when it comes to platinum group metals. You know, what are your interests and existing initiatives, and also what are your, non-negotiables when it comes to this subject? Thank you.
Thanks, Polelwa. I'll share my screen quickly. Okay.
Okay, we can see it. I think you just need to expand it as well. Thank you.
Can you see the building better markets?
Yes.
On Africa's largest. No, that's perfect. Thank you again. Thank you so much for the invitation, Polelwa. And again, my name is Annelisa Matutu, and I am the manager for commodity derivatives at the JSE. And just as a way of introduction for the JSE, we are the biggest exchange operator in South Africa and in Africa as well. And we basically provide a platform for capital raising, looking specifically into the primary markets, the equities markets, and the bonds market. We also provide trading platforms for trading, facilitating trading in the secondary market. So we've got a commodity derivatives market, we've got a interest rates market, which is the derivatives markets for bonds. We've got a currency derivatives markets, as well as the equity derivatives markets. Now, our relationship, or rather partnership, with MISTRA and peers and other industry stakeholders, such as mining company, mining houses, government institutions, as well as some PGM processors, started a few years ago, about 5 or 4 years ago, I can't remember exactly. And what we were looking at basically was just a research report, just focusing on the feasibility of launching or introducing an exchange, a PGM exchange in South Africa, so the feasibility thereof. And really the outcomes of that research report was a publication which was launched last year, a book which I hope most of you have seen, or a book which I hope most of you have read. And the title of the book is South African PGM Exchange Policy for Financial Beneficiation. Now, as the JSE, I'm sure you might agree with me, we cannot speak on behalf of all business. I would think that is something more suitable for your BUSAs or your BLSA to really opine on. But having said that, from a JSE perspective, we support beneficiation. And we truly believe that it is critical for our economy. It is also critical for our social development, especially in industries where we are a primary resource provider. And this is something that is well known, excuse me, and that has been known for many years. Although we haven't moved as fast as we should as a country, and I'm sure we all know as well that beneficiation needs to be strategic as well as long-term orientated. And for some uses of PGM, for example, fuel cells, they're directly congruent with our plan as a country to progress beneficiation. And where the opportunity lies as a country is to just make that clear and potentially give support to those industries. We need to be explicit about the opportunities, and we need to be explicit about how we support those industries. Think about the incentives that will be able to provide those industries and companies, which basically will make us competitive in a world that is clearly becoming or moving into the direction of a greener economy. So what will be important from business perspective? So speed will be crucial. Certain regions, as mentioned by previous speakers, are moving much faster than us. So, Martin mentioned Namibia, Zama, I think, mentioned Japan, and in European countries, the economy has a specific strategy in how they're going to finance their green economy. And the opportunity again for us is to move quickly in helping and supporting those industries that will help us as a country and as an economy to realize beneficiation. We also need to be mindful of what we do and how we do it. So exactly what is this beneficiation all about? Why are we doing it? You know, are we doing it for the sake of beneficiation, or do we want to do it to create something better for the future? And that ultimately means our pension funds have something to invest in, something better to invest in, because we have companies that are future fit. And from an exchange perspective, one of the things in relation to sustainability, which we usually think about around environmental and social issues, is that the exchange has such a fundamental and big role that it plays in creating an enabling environment for better disclosure practices to grow, basically. But really, what's that trying to do is to drive better business practices, you know, with a hope that disclosure will drive behavior. And reporting is actually the end state, you know, but you would have to do something in order to report. Now, the kind of disclosures that we have at the JSE, particularly for our environmental, social, and government and governance model, which I'm sure most of you know as the ESG model, certainly about 80% to 90% of our market cap is assessed against that ESG model for sustainability. And at the moment, it includes most of the big PGM companies. And the disclosures that we require, they have a strong focus on the social aspect, and they also focus on the environmental and governance issues. So with respect to the social aspects, the companies are assessed on how they manage, for example, as I'm sure you can see on the slide there, their human rights and community labor standards and so forth. And so already from a JSE perspective, there is some pressure that we're exerting on the listed companies, right, on disclosures. And this is regardless of legislation and also regardless of sector charters. And really the point, or what we're trying to achieve, is for these companies, number one, to disclose and report, as well as to make that information available to stakeholders. And really that is our way of trying to shift the deal in trying to ensure that companies think about these things and report their activities in the public domain. Also, there's a broader enabling environment. So it's not just the JSE and the disclosures that we require. There is the investor as well as the man on the street. So as the JSE, we're trying our best to create that framework for disclosure and allowing information to be available to the stakeholders who can use that information then to start engaging with these companies. And as the JSE, again, we can't tell companies, you know, what to do, what to include in their social compact or what to exclude in their social compact. However, what we're trying to do or what we're trying to achieve is to bring global norms and standards And that's how we're trying to influence, by trying to ensure better disclosure. So the rest of the ecosystem can work together and use this information again to start engaging with these companies, to start engaging as industry, also use the information to start assessing these companies and their transitioning and factor in that information into their investment decisions. And just quickly here, I extracted the top 30 companies, and this is ranked on ESG scores, right? And this information is based on the last assessment, which was in July of this year. And these companies feature on the JSE FTSE Responsible Investment Index. And you can see some of the mining houses do feature in the top 30. This is a top 30 ranked on ESG scores, the highest ESG scores. You can see some PGM producers. I won't mention names, I'm sure you can see yourself. But from conversations that I've been having with our sustainability team, it's clear that over time, the mining companies and other companies as well have progressed over time, and the industry has been putting some effort in progressing to progress in the sustainability arena. But there is still a lot of opportunity and a lot that we can still achieve. Thank you, Colette.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Annelisa. Quite informative, a bit complex, but I think it does demonstrate some movement around what the business is doing, because we do have some assumptions that we tend to make about what is happening in that space. The last contributor to this panel discussion is Dr. Kwaga, who is coming from the Semtambane Institute, which was formed by the National Union of Mine Workers. It will be quite interesting to hear the sentiments from labor, and especially labor that operates within the PGM sector, because that has been very volatile in the recent past. And I'm interested in hearing more about what that sector broadly, is willing to contribute to this conversation, and how to take things forward in partnership with business and also government. Over to you, Martin. We have another Martin there in the form of Dr. Kwaga.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity also to make comments from labor's perspective, or looking at social compacting from the lens of labor. You have already introduced me, Martin Kabwa, from the Research Institute of the National Union of Mine Workers. I must acknowledge that MISTRA played a role in the starting of this research institute. And I'm happy to present, to talk about social compact from workers' perspective. And to start off, I think it is important to state that as workers, as laborers, we think that social compacting is very important. But we need to agree what is this social compacting is all about, such that we are discussing about the same thing. So I try to come up with a definition that comes from what I hear from the workers' constituency of what they perceive as social compacting. And I think my presentation is going to be linked to that definition, whereby I see social compacting as a process of having an agreement or a common understanding between shareholders regarding the roles, obligations, expectations, trade-offs of each party regarding a common aspect of interest. And in this case, we are talking about the PGM sector, its growth, and the distribution of benefits therefrom. It is important that social compacting should be understood broadly, because sometimes stakeholders only focus on the roles and they omit the obligation. Sometimes we focus on expectation and we omit the trade-offs. Yet for you to have a harmonious sector growing forward, you need to make sure that as workers, if we commit to a compact, we know what we are going to get and what we are not going to get. So it is important to recognize that social compacting is important, but we need to define it broadly, and all of us agree on what it should and should not include. The second point I would like to emphasize is that from a labor perspective, social compacting with PGM is very important and crucial. Basically for three reasons. One, you are dealing with a resource that is owned by the people. At least in theory, PGMs, according to the Freedom Charter, are owned by all South Africans. In practice, most of the PGMs are handed over, for lack of a better word, to private hands through a license. So you have this contention of private actors managing a public asset. The second element is that, like any other mineral, PGMs have a period of making profit and a period of not making profit. And sometimes it is a finite process. At one point, the profitability of the sector will go down. And this creates an incentive of some of the actors to maximize profit or benefit within particular periods, and sometimes ignoring other players. The third element is that this sector, as you all know or you may not know, is dominated by multinational and big actors with powers to determine where to add value and how to transfer resources. So there is power that is skewed in the hands of big multinational companies. With that in mind, there are serious implications in terms of how labor wants to engage with the PGMs as they are developed to fuel cells and hydrogen economy. And the labor position is based on the expectation that since we are dealing with a common asset, there should be some fair ways of sharing the benefits, but not only sharing the benefits during the active period or the good period. Some of the benefits need to outlive the period when they are generated. So we are saying it should not only be about how benefit is generated within a particular period is utilized, but what happens when that period of profitability falls away. The second aspect that I also would like to highlight is that because all of us, stakeholders, the private actors who bring capital, the people who believe this asset belongs to them, the financiers, the banks, all of us believe that we have a stake in this common PGM development. There is always tension in mapping out the future forward. And this tension is made worse by the information asymmetry. We do recognize as labor or workers that some of the parties, like the private actors, often have more information than we. As such, we go into negotiating how to share the benefits at disadvantage from an information asymmetry perspective. So with that in mind, as labor, we believe that the PGM sector has a future in medium to long term. And we acknowledge the fact that there's effort that is being done in fuel cell development and the hydrogen economy. However, we think that going forward should not follow the previous print of what we have seen so far in terms of PGM development. So labor feels that there should be a social contract in the PGM sector, and some of the pillars on which it should be built should be the ideal of job creation and job retention. And where jobs cannot be retained, there should be a carefully mapped out strategy of how to facilitate transition from the sector to other sectors of the economy. We also believe, and here I talk, and I'm a little bit biased because I come from the National Union of Mine Workers, that there should be an ideal of increasing the stakes of workers in business. For example, through beneficial ESOPs. ESOPs are employee ownership schemes. There are so many employee ownership schemes. Some of them did benefit workers, but many of them did not. So we believe that beneficial ESOPs should be part and parcel of the social compact that labor needs to engage with other stakeholders. The other point is about transparency in business operation, because transparency will ease tension. As I said, with the information asymmetry, many workers find themselves on the back foot because they don't have enough information, and they are not sure whether they are getting a fair, and I'm not saying an equitable, just a fair benefits of what the sector is generating. Finally, but not second last point I want to make is that there should also be deliberate effort, that there should be domestic ownership. Black South African, previous disadvantaged people should also have a footprint in the ownership of the sector. Otherwise, the sector will continue to be seen as foreign. Okay, and that foreignness brings about questions of trust and questions of how the resources generated are being used locally to support development, or whether there's capital flight. And finally, also something that came out from other presenters is that there should be a period of a deliberate effort to increase local value addition and beneficial economic linkages with communities. Because local value addition creates more opportunities for people to participate, and creating linkages in the communities means that even if the sector changes in the future, there are benefits that will stay and outlast the sector. So broadly speaking, labor is excited and is willing to participate in all efforts, as colleagues from the industry, from government, from the media have highlighted. But it needs to participate well knowing that the development of the sector takes into consideration people element, and there will be visible benefit that emanates from the growth and the participation of workers and the community in the PGM sector. My concluding point is that from the labor perspective, the question on social compact in PGM is no longer whether to have it or not to have it, but rather what should be the pillars of this social compact and who should spearhead it. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwaka, for that presentation from the labor perspective. So now we're going to get into the discussion. And I've noted that there's been quite a lot of questions that have been coming through our Q&A function, and that my colleagues have been addressing those, in particular, Edie, Joel Nechitenze, Zamanzima has been also addressing those quite a few questions that went towards Dr. Cosmas Chiteme around the technology and all the climate change issues. Anelile has also been addressing some questions, but just in summary, I'll just try to get a high-level overview of some of the key questions, and any of you can respond to those. There was the question around the pricing of the fuel cells, and I think Chiteme is best placed to respond to this question on whether it is worth our while to embark on fuel cells, considering the price of producing fuel cells. There's also the question on the contribution by the small, or rather junior PGM producers. And I think any of the colleagues can answer, because we don't have anyone representing the mining sector or even the Minerals Council specifically. The role of DMRE is also questioned there, think, again, Cosmas, you're in the spotlight because your government, and I see Zama has tried to address that question. But also, Annalisa, there was a question around financial beneficiation. If you could care to just, demystify this notion of financial beneficiation, because some participants are not convinced that this has anything to do with job creation. So I think just as a first round of questions, if we can maybe try to address those, starting with Cosmas, and then we go on to Annalisa. And then I'm also, maybe to finish off, Martin, if you can speak to the questions. There's quite a few questions around the motor industry and their role. And as we know that we do have a strong workforce that's within that, it's outside your specific sector, but just wearing a labor hat in terms of how our workforce that's building all these cars, even though South Africa does not own any of these car manufacturing companies. Over to you, colleagues.
Thanks, Kolelo. I didn't see the specific question about cost, but I'll try and respond to it in a more general way. I think when you've got emerging technologies coming onto the market, the issue of costs is always there. And some of these costs gets addressed by economies of scale when you start producing these technologies at scale, and then it makes it cost effective to produce them. The other aspect is also incremental innovation allows you to increase performance of the technology and also to use other innovative materials. And in the case of platinum-based fuel cells, we may think that reducing the loading on the catalysts is against us as against our aspirations as South Africa. But once you reduce the loading, you actually allow for greater uptake of the technology, because then the costs reduces, and then the technology becomes mainstream. With respect to the involvement of DMRE, I think at a government level, we have been engaging quite a lot with DMRE and other government departments like your environment, public works, even as far as defense with the deployment at Military One Hospital. But I think those discussions are ongoing. When we started on the Hydrogen Society Roadmap development process, we actually had the terms of reference agreed to by an interdepartmental committee. So those engagements, again, are ongoing. The draft roadmap document will actually be discussed again with industry, with an industry body, as well as an interdepartmental committee before it is discussed in a collaboration workshop with a broader stakeholder group. So I'll stop there, but we can address other questions going forward.
And next panelist.
It's Annalisa Kolelo. Thank you for the question. And maybe just to clarify that the idea around establishing a PGM exchange in South Africa was just built around the fact that we, I believe, own, or we hold about 80% of the platinum reserves globally. I believe the SADC South Africa with Zimbabwe. And the question that was asked there is then, why is then the price discovered in London? Why is the price not discovered in South Africa? When we do have the exchange, we do have the trading platforms where we can actually bring back that price discovery from London to an exchange or a company in South Africa. And really the role of an exchange is to provide a trading platform where buyers and sellers can negotiate, if you want to call it that, bid and offer, negotiate pricing in a platform in a transparent manner where everyone can see where the market or the price is moving. Thank you. I hope that addresses the question.
Thank you very much for that intervention, Annalisa. I know a lot of people are not convinced about this.
Perhaps, just to add.
Yes, Eddie?
Yeah, as an advertisement, that the book is available, motivating for the PGM Exchange. And as Annalisa has indicated, location is one of the reasons, as well as the extent of the endowment. Price discovery is another. The question has also been raised as to whether jobs would be created through such an exchange. Definitely at the level of service jobs, which are skilled jobs in terms of the financial sector, managing it at various levels at the JSE, with the banks and so on. There would also be jobs created with regard to logistics and storage and security and so on and so forth. So we see this as financial beneficiation, but it will also have other elements to it. There was also the question posed about small and medium PGM producers to participate through the value chain. I think they need to reflect on the matter and pose to themselves the question, where in the value chain beyond production of the raw materials can they participate? And already, as has been indicated, there are a number of small companies, Black-owned companies, that are participating in the production of fuel cells, for instance. Isondo is one of them, which is establishing a factory at the OR Tambo SEZ. There's Bambili. But what we can also add is that if people want to participate at that level of the value chain with regard to fuel cells, they might want to interact with HISA and DSI to see what role they can play and who they can partner with. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Then I hand over to Martin Kwaga to just reflect on the question on the automotive industry. We know that it's not within your specific sector, but it's part of the value chain or the process of adding value to PGMs from the South African perspective.
Thank you, Chair. When it comes to the automotive sector, we recognize that in its current structure, the automotive sector is a significant employer. And we also recognize that the migration to the hydrogen economy may change some of the status quo, and they could be job losses or they could be job transition. So what we are struggling with and what a common answer we have when it comes to changing the production and the labor dynamics in any workplace is to have a transition whereby we are clear in advance who is going to be affected and who is likely not to be affected, and how to make sure that those that will be affected when the status quo changes are either created opportunities to get other jobs or they go into a safety network. So broadly, what I can say is that if the moving to the hydrogen economy is going to disrupt the current employment status quo in the automotive sector, we need to have a plan on how to manage the transition to make sure that that process is, as we say, it is a just transition. It does not make some people or workers worse off while making others better off. Chair, that is my broad response to that.
Thank you so much. There's some questions that relate to global warming and the role of the hydrogen economy in climate change. I will ask my colleague, Zamanzima, to maybe share her reflections on that, as she's been leading our conversations around the just transition as well. And maybe after Uzama responds, any one of the panelists who would like to maybe take on the question on safety, because someone is worried about how hydrogen conjures up images of World War II with hydrogen bombs being used to wipe out entire cities. So that's anyone of the panelists can take that one. I suspect it could be Cosmos. Over to you, Zama, on the impact on climate change.
So I think we all agree, well, maybe not all, but most of us agree that the issue of climate change is one that is quite urgent. The hydrogen fuel cells are coming into play. I think it's very useful, and it's an angle to which we can lobby for them to be part of the energy mix, because they provide clean energy, which is something that particularly South Africa needs to be looking at, as we are around number 14 greenhouse gas emitters in the world. So the use of fuel cells in order to actually mitigate climate change effects is one that we need to look at, and one that is quite urgent for us to actually explore. I think that's pretty much, yeah. The fact that it's green energy is undoubtedly an important angle that we need to actually really explore.
Thank you, Zama. And any takers on the issue of safety? Or even Martin, if you wish to contribute towards that, or Martin.
Yeah, I can take that one. I think I tried to respond on the Q&A. Safety is definitely an issue of concern, and it's not just unique to hydrogen and fuel cell technology alone. One can also imagine the time when petrol was first introduced. We all know how flammable it is, but despite all that, the technology has become mainstream, and it's driven by the need to use the technology, but also improvements in managing the handling of those types of fuels. So we are using the same approach, or we envisage the same approach with hydrogen. Hydrogen, I think, is being used quite extensively in industry. Some people can actually give you stats around how much hydrogen is used in the fuel refinery, in making margarine, and all those industry as an input chemical. Granted, when we start looking at vehicles, we are looking at high pressure hydrogen at 700 bar in passenger vehicles, but also at the pump where it is dispensed. But the point is, even in the design of the refueling station, they are designed in such a way that even the roof faces upwards, because once hydrogen, there is a leak in hydrogen, it propagates, it dissipates quite quickly because it's one of the lightest elements. So there is technology that is being used to address the issues of safety, even when it happens while the vehicle is moving. So it's ongoing efforts, and as a department, we are participating through other entities like even SABS to try and address issues of hydrogen safety. So that's all I can say for now. I'll be happy to provide more details around the international platforms that are looking at safety codes and standards on hydrogen usage.
Thank you very much for that.
And perhaps, Cosmas, just to add that We're not talking about fusion and fission here of the hydrogen atom in order to create a nuclear explosion. We're talking about the usage of hydrogen as a chemical.
That is so true, Edie. And may I also point out there is an experiment that was actually done in France where they ignited a hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicle together with a diesel powered vehicle. And the results there were quite astonishing because the diesel vehicle was actually severely damaged compared to the hydrogen. Of course, granted, it was done in an open environment rather than in an underground, as in the case of mining.
Thank you very much, colleagues. That brings us to the end of this panel discussion. We've tried to resolve and address as many questions as possible. There is an opportunity to send emails if you feel that you still have further questions. Now, we need to take what we've heard today and take stock of that, but also to help us take stock of today's proceedings and discussions. We have among us a colleague who's joining us from New York, Jeffrey Christian, who is also an expert on PGMs, and he's going to share with us some reflections from an international perspective. So he's an outsider looking within, and it should be very interesting for him to listen to the challenges and the opportunities that have been illustrated, and also the different attempts at actually trying to benefit from our endowment with platinum group metals. Over to you, Jeffrey, and let's hear from the international perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning from New York. I want to thank MISTRA for organizing these roundtables, not only this one, but the past ones too. These discussions are necessary, and you know, someone made the comment that there's been a lot of talk since 2016 and perhaps not actions, but I think the actions come, and they come more slowly and subtly, and we don't necessarily notice them. I also want to thank MISTRA for inviting me to participate in this discussion. Before I talk about my views, and my views may not be representative of the world, but they are from outside of South Africa, I wanted to say, in many other metals markets, the mining companies don't try to come up with new uses for their products. What they do is they provide support to researchers at manufacturing companies that they feel are better suited to finding new uses. The PGM industry has done that in a way, going with semi-fabricators and with refiners / semi-fabricators that they've supported for decades. And I think that's there. When we work with producers, refiners, but we also work with auto companies, institutional investors, and many other people. And when we look and talk to auto manufacturers everywhere, China, Japan, South Korea, Europe, the United States, what we find is there's a great deal of uncertainty about which motive propulsion technology will win in the long run. There are so many there. And I think one of the things that's going on is that there is more optimism about electric vehicles than is warranted. I started studying electric vehicles just to qualify myself a little bit. I started writing about electric vehicles and studying them in 1978, and actually wrote a couple books on electric vehicles, 78, 79, before getting into metals. I started following the platinum industry in 1978, 79 as well, and started publishing reports on them in 1979. Right now, I think that there's too much optimism about electric vehicles. And when you talk to the auto industry, they don't really understand which technology is going to win. They do think that the use of diesel and petrol as the preferred form of motive propulsion will continue much longer than a lot of other people think. And that by 2050, the middle of this century, you still will have more than half of the vehicles being produced and used globally using petrol or diesel as their fuel. Electric vehicles, I think, are seen as an interim technology. It's not enough electricity to power them. The grids in most countries couldn't distribute the electricity if it wasn't there. There are tens of trillions of billions of dollars of OEM manufacturing capacity that is not being financed and built. So they think it's going to be much slower. And then there's this big, nasty, ugly thing that no one wants to talk about, which is that at the end of the day, electric vehicles use electricity, much of which is still produced from coal. So an electric BMW SUV in South Africa or in Australia, where most of your power comes from coal, actually kicks out more carbon dioxide, including the battery manufacturing process, than the diesel SUV of the same model. And what we're finding is that the auto industry is throwing money at all of these technologies because they don't know which one's going to win. The people in the PGM market will say, oh, well, auto industry is going full in on fuel cells. But people in the lithium industry or the manganese industry will say, no, they're going all in on electric vehicles. And the reality is they're hedging their bets. They're spending money on all of those things. The PGM industry says if we can get hydrogen distributed safely and cheaply, because it is a safety issue, which I'll get back to in a second, we'll see fuel cells take off. The auto industry says if we can get hydrogen distributed cheaply and safely, we will go to hydrogen engines. The first internal combustion engine, the proof of concept that an internal combustion engine would work, was in 1806 in France, and it used hydrogen as the fuel. Said, okay, internal combustion engines work. Now what can we use as fuel? Because hydrogen is too dangerous. There was discussion in one of the presentations earlier. It was Cosmas, Dr. Cosmas Teme's presentation that mentioned liquid organic hydrogen carriers. At least it was on some of the slides. That's an interesting technology because it takes hydrogen and distributes it as a hydrogenated organic liquid, which has, depending on which liquid you're using, there are people in North America and in Europe looking at technologies that have toxic, carcinogenic, explosive chemicals. But there are other companies that are looking at liquid organic hydrogen carriers that have the same toxicity and volatility as diesel fuel and can be used. You can use the existing petrol and diesel distribution system to ship, store, and distribute the hydrogen. That gets rid of the safety. Yes, we're not talking about fission when we're talking about fuel cells or hydrogen engines, but we are talking about an extremely explosive gas that doesn't trade well. And we've seen fueling stations explode in Norway, and we've seen a hydrogen delivery truck catch fire in Los Angeles. So shipping and storing frozen or compressed hydrogen is a dangerous issue. Liquid organic hydrogen carriers are really interesting because you remove that cost thing. You can ship and store this stuff at ambient temperatures and 1 atmospheric pressure. So they're much more safer, and they could accelerate it. They could remove the tens of trillions of dollars of infrastructure. In Los Angeles, it takes $2.4 million to build a hydrogen fueling station using compressed hydrogen. It takes $200,000 to retrofit an existing fueling station to deal with a LOHC. So I think LOHCs could come very quickly. My concern for the PGM industry is that in fuel cells, they're technically difficult. They're very expensive compared to engines and even battery packs. The reliability is increasing. I think that fuel cells have a tremendous potential in various niche markets, but not for on-the-road transportation. And I think that the PGM industry and the South African government should be cognizant of that, and they should be focusing their activities with fuel cells toward that. They also have to be cognizant of the fact that the fuel cell industry, stack manufacturers, and the auto companies that are their clients have reduced the platinum probably 99% from where it was when I started following this stuff. And they have a mandate to get rid of all of the platinum. So I'm not sure that fuel cells save platinum or the PGM industry. I think the PGM industry should be paying attention to other potential uses across industries, not just motive power and vehicles, but also electronics, solar panels, wind power, other new energy technologies that may come along that would require PGMs. We've seen LED lighting really drive the iridium market from a more moribund byproduct that no one really cared to a metal that now is well over $1,000 per ounce, and there's not enough of it. So I think there are other technologies that should be pushed. In 1993, CPM Group had suggested that a technology research park could be created in the Bushveld. That was premature in 1993, but I think it could happen now, and I think it could be important. I think one of the things that really should be done in South Africa is that your outreach, trying to get together and collaborate with companies, really needs to reach out to the OEM manufacturers, the LOHC research companies, and other companies around the world, and encourage them to perhaps invest in and participate in a research park in the Bushveld that not only focuses on potential new uses for PGMs, but also chrome, manganese, and other metals that are important to South Africa, because I think that's all there. So I think you have to really look at all technologies, because I'm not sure that motive power, especially for on the road, is going to be there. You know, there's always been this great optimism. When I started in the business, 1978, 1979, the South African producers were saying that by 1988, we'd be using 320,000 ounces of platinum per year in fuel cells. And they've continued to say it's 300, 400, 500, 600,000 ounces a year up until the present time. And in reality, over that 40 some odd year period of time, we have seen fuel cells use about 20 to 30 or 40,000 ounces a year. So I think that the fuel cell industry is not necessarily the great savior of the PGM industry. And the PGM industry and the South African government should be encouraging the PGM industry to look across technologies and across industries for new uses. One last comment, which is related to the potential of a South African future exchange. Look at what happened in Shanghai and Tokyo. Tokyo started a platinum exchange and a palladium contract in the early 1980s. I actually was part of a team in New York. I was a little bit surprised because New York was extremely helpful in creating the TOCOM platinum and palladium contracts. And I didn't understand that because I thought that these things would cannibalize the New York market. They did for a while, and now they don't. And in Shanghai, we now have a platinum contract, and we have a platinum and palladium physical market. And these are very small markets. Our clients in Shanghai and Tokyo primarily trade on the New York Mercantile Exchange, platinum and palladium. And that's where most of the liquidity and volume and open interest remains. So I'm not sure that a PGM futures exchange in Johannesburg would bring a lot of volume and a lot of business. I think what it would do is perhaps dissipate the liquidity on a global basis and make the market perhaps a little bit more volatile. And I don't think it would drive up the prices. I think that I participated in research that led to a book called The Cooperative Edge in the early 1980s. And that's always been, despite the fact that I'm American, I'm actually really big on international cooperation. That's the way to go. You know, you want to push platinum investment, don't try to create a platinum coin that in South Africa that's going to use 10, 12,000 ounces a year. Go off to the companies, the mints, the national mints in Australia, Austria, Canada, and the United States that are producing platinum coins and say, what can we do to help you stimulate demand for platinum investment products. You want to work with a platinum exchange, work with NYMEX. Say, what can we do there? And what can we do to train South Africans to more effectively participate on the NYMEX? Because I think that that's probably a more useful way. We were actually involved with a thing that was going to be the African Bourse in South Africa probably a decade ago. And unfortunately, it didn't go, it didn't launch, it went away. I like exchanges. We use exchange products for our clients all the time, but I don't necessarily think having an exchange in Joburg would actually benefit things. But having the JSE work in cooperation with the NYMEX and maybe having a trading room in the JSE where people can trade PGMs. And when I say trading room these days, you mean electronic platform. I think that might be a lot better and more useful to the PGM market and industry in South Africa. That's what I have. I hope I haven't been too much of a pessimist, I try to say I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey Christian, from those insights from the international perspective. Very encouraging, in particular around today's subject matter, which involves partnerships. But from what I gather from your input is that we need to extend those partnerships to beyond our borders, to forge global partnerships around PGMs, and also to actually emphasize further research and development, in particular around new industries. I mean, what I take from that is that there is more to PGMs than just the auto industry and fuel cell technologies. Now, in terms of forming our pillars, what I'm gathering from today's proceedings is that at the local level, there are still tensions. And I think the biggest elephant in the room is that issue of ownership of this of these minerals that happen to be underneath our feet. There's a lot of tension that has been generated through that, and perhaps maybe not spoken of as much, but there is a need to undo some of the knots that still remain even with this current new initiative of the SEZ in Bujanala. But I'd like to end off on that note, to actually give us food for thought for next tables, because as MISTRA, we intend to continue with these engagements. Maybe, who knows, next year we could have a global webinar or workshop that actually engages with these new opportunities on a more global scale. With that said, I'd like to bring this session to a close, but I'd like before to thank all our contributors, the technical team, more especially, Creamer Media's Shannon Anelile, was the coordinator of this project, Sipokazi, our communications officer at MISTRA, the entire KESA team, MISTRA colleagues under the leadership of Jolnech Denze, who opened this session for us, Zamanzima Mazibuko Makena, who's leading KESA, and I'd like to thank Martin Creamer, our co-host, and Creamer Media in its entirety for offering us this platform and for their professionalism in conducting this webinar. Then next, our panelists, Dr. Cosmas Deme, Annelisa Matutu, Martin Kwaka, and lastly, our international guest, Jeffrey Christian. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to all our participants. I know we've lost a few of you. Those who could not download the report, please drop us an email. We will send it to you. We'll also try to deal with the technical issues on our website so that you can get access to it. With that said, I'd like to hand back over to Creamer Media, who are our hosts, to close this session. Thank you and have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you so very much, Kulelwa. I would like to take this opportunity to thank each of our very esteemed panelists for joining us today. And of course, thank you to our attendees for taking the time to join this webinar. If you would like more information about MISTRA, please visit their website at mistra.org.za. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course, as well as a digital copy of the report. And if you have any additional questions, Please do be in touch. You can reach me at shannon@creamermedia.co.za.